let's talk brows. Hairstroke brows, or more importantly, hairstroke brows for sparse brows. Instagram brows are out and natural fluffy looking hairstroke brows are where it's at just lately, but some of us aren't gifted with loads of brow hair and it makes it quite difficult for us to achieve that feathered look. But where there's a will, there's a way, so let me show you how to achieve these gorgeous hairstroke brows. This tutorial is almost exclusively drugstore or high street affordable brands, but this is one product that I absolutely cannot live without when it comes to doing hairstroke fluffy brows, and it is the Brow Freeze from Anastasia Beverly Hills. This will hold your brow hairs in place like no other product on earth. Even the most stubborn, coarse brows stay exactly where you put them, and it is super easy to use. I just use a disposable spoolie, take some of the product out. You don't need a lot. Put it on the lid to distribute it through all the spoolie hairs, and then I brush my brows into place where I want them to stay, and they will stay, let me tell you. I brush the brow hairs all sorts of ways just to make sure they are thoroughly coated in the product, and then quite roughly I press down as I am putting those brow hairs into place, and I just keep going over them until they are basically firmly stuck to my head. The Brow Freeze does set quite quickly, but it still gives you plenty of time to make sure those hairs are standing exactly how you want them to. If you have sparse brows, which is probably why you're watching this, you're going to want to draw the shape in first. So I use a brow pencil and I sharpen it on a nail buffer or old nail file just to give it that fresh out of the cellophane point. Means we can get a nice crisp line, and I underline my brow first, creating the arch. The benefit of having sparse brows is that sometimes you can just basically decide whatever shape brows you want. I tend to go for more of the Korean style straight brow just lately, but of course you fill in your brows according to the shape that you like or the shape that you have. Then I flatten off the top of those brow hairs just so the brow isn't super thick, and I taper the top line down to a tail. This gives me a guide of where to fill in with my pomade. I suggest using a very light coloured pomade or skipping this step entirely, just because it does give more of a structured effect. Of course, it is personal choice. I like to have a structured sort of background to my brows and then go in with the hair strokes on top, which is where this differs from my Instagram brows tutorial, which you'll see in a minute. I only load my brush up once. I go over those lines, fill in the very tail, and then as there becomes less product on the brush, I work that last bit of pomade forward so that it is faded more towards the front of the brow. If you have skipped the pomade, then go straight to this step. Take brow powder, again in a fairly light colour, and then fill in the shape of the brow. If you have used pomade, use a tapping motion so as to not disturb any of the pomade as you're going, and again keep the bulk of the product towards the tail of the brow so that the tail is darker than the front. I also go in with a lighter shade of brow powder, or in my case eyeshadow, for the front to really get that ombre effect. You can take the Instagram brows, I know what I'm trying to say, but basically I just go in with a lighter powder at the front, and again using as least product as possible, and you can see those brow hairs are pretty much literally glued into place with that brow freeze. Now this is where it gets fun, and this is where the hair strokes come in. So I use brow pens for this step, and I actually use 2 shades. So I go in with the lighter shade first, and I literally draw on hair by hair, stroke by stroke, the brow hairs. They might not be super visible at first, but it's all going to add to the effect. I also add a few in the front of the brow, not as heavily as towards the tail, just because I like that effect. And then I go in with a darker shade and add a few more brow hairs, and this is what gives it that 3D effect. And don't worry about being super neat with this step, because we are going to carve out the brow. And here I'm just taking a concealer. You can use whatever you would normally use to carve your brows, whether that be a concealer, an eye base, your foundation, whatever it is. Just get that and carve your brow as you would normally. Take your time and just refine that shape as much or as little as you like. The more you carve, the more structured the brow is going to look, so bear that in mind. If you like the more natural look, then only carve ever so slightly, or maybe even skip it all together. It really is up to you, and it depends what kind of finish you prefer. Once you've carved, make sure to take a fluffier brush and blend it away so there's no harsh edges, or continue down and use it as your eye base. It depends whether you use one product for both steps or separate products. So here I use separate products, so I'm just getting rid of any harsh lines so that when that concealer dries, we're not left with a line that is impossible to blend. This last step is only if you want quite a structured brow, as it does really frame it, but I take a concealer that is super close to my foundation shade. You could of course just use your foundation instead, and I carve the top of the brow to give it shape and definition. As I say, I really love my structured brows. I've just tweaked them to make them more of a hairstroke version, but of course you could skip all these defining steps and end up with a much nicer natural hairstroke brow. It all just depends on the mood that you're in. So this was my updated brow routine. I definitely go for this style of brow more often than not now. It is my go-to. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. Sometimes I do them a bit darker like here, sometimes I do go a little bit lighter, but the steps that I follow are still the same. You just have to adjust the shades that you're using accordingly, but honestly they are really simple to do but really effective, and they do look a little bit more natural than those sort of stark Instagram structured brows. They still hold a special place in my heart, but I mean, these are nice too. As always, Pickles, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.